Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the fifth session on our exploration of the Ephesians 4 gifts. And tonight we are going to be exploring the teaching gift. And we have with us Paul and Ruth Brown, and Paul obviously shared with us last Sunday, and they'll be hopefully taking lots of questions from us later on. But just in the way of these things, I'll just do a quick recap of the issues that we covered on Sunday. Let's just move it over here. So just a bit of a recap. So teachers are uniquely gifted by Jesus to give instruction in the Word of God, inspiring clear understanding and application. That's what it's all about. Again, just to remind you of this slide that we shared way back at the very beginning of this series. We talk about the archetypes, so the sage, the thinker, the observer, the philosopher, etc. In our general culture, we see these people as philosophers, as sages, instructors, investigators, scientists, and so on, educators, obviously, thinkers and coaches. In terms of the type, what we call the categories of intelligence, so the types of the thing you'll see in these individuals, they are the rational people generally, very knowledgeable, reflective, almost philosophical, insightful. They are also quite analytical and forensic, very much a past orientation. Can I ask whoever's not muted their mic to maybe mute the mic, please? We're getting a lot of noise. So just as I was saying, so they're very much looking past and bringing sort of past experience and the history to life in the future, in the present and future. In terms of the domains within society in which they're operating, you'll most often find these individuals in education, in science, philosophy, publishing, engineering and the likes. And then as always, we have our universal examples. And there's our list of universal examples. I won't go through them all, but you can see, and I'm sure there's many other names that many of you can think of that would fit into that category. So moving on. I covered on Sunday, as part of what we were doing, we talked about 5 teaching combinations, or where the teacher gift is combined with one of the other gifts, and the different types of teacher that creates. We had something called the crisis creator, where was that shepherding and teaching combination, shepherding being the stronger of the two, because you'll notice we also have the teaching and shepherding combination. So that crisis creator was that combination. The style is sometimes to sort of, some of us might know it as sort of chucking the students in at the deep end. They give them enough to sort of just about survive, but not quite enough, and it requires the students really to rely on what they have learned and their experience thus far to get them through. But because of that shepherding strength, it is very much a loving sort of chucking in, so that they're not going to chuck them in and let them drown. They're very much pushing them into a crisis. And as we said, learning through a crisis is sometimes one of the easiest things for us all to do. We then have the passion igniter, that apostolic and teaching combination. And they are the type of teacher that really inspires us to imagine, beyond our wildest imaginations of what we could be, where we could be, what we could be doing. And often challenging us to think about the things we've not even thought about in terms of ourselves and where we might go. Then we have what I call the truth excavator. That's the evangelistic and the teaching. And I use the example of, Indiana Jones, get them out of the classroom, get them into the field, get them doing and unearthing and learning and really shedding light on, and very practical approach that the truth excavator brings to teaching. Then we have the mentoring master, which is the teaching shepherding combination. So the other way around. So the shepherding is less strong in this combination. It's very much a teaching combination. And it is, as I said, that mentoring master, their life is the lesson, and the pupil or the student is learning from the life, and they're very much part of the mentor's sort of overall life. And we explained that this was the closest in many respects to the example of Jesus, that rabbi with followers, and that way of teaching was very much how he lived his life, and they learned from that. And then finally, we had what we call the memory maker, the prophetic and teacher combination. And their job very much was reminding us, of of who we are and who we are of, if you like. So it was very much, their focus is vertical as well. So really helping us understand who we are in God and what God and that relationship. So that was just a very quick recap for those of you who saw it. Those of you who didn't, then I can highly recommend. It was a good video to watch. So having rushed through all of that, I really wanted to just get us started on, and I'll leave these up for us all to have a look at as we talk about these. You know, what's our reaction to these? What do we think? Are these types we've seen? Are these, do we see ourselves in any of these types? Have we come across other types that we could say? And I think that will then lead hopefully to a very natural conversation with Paul and Ruth and any sort of questions, obviously given their experience. And first off, I'm going to put them both on the spot, and I know that it's a bit unfair given they've probably only just been introduced this language. But Paul, Ruth, looking at those, which one of these, if any, would you say that either of you fall into? Please, you can all unmute yourselves now because this is where the discussion can start.
Are you going first?
Well, yeah. It's an interesting kind of way of pairing them up like that to see how these things, and some of them very clearly don't fit. Others, I think, maybe fit into a couple of them. But for me, it's definitely more paired up with the kind of shepherding pastoral gifting. So the kind of mentoring model, focus on getting alongside people and helping them to progress in their own journey, and maybe a bit of the crisis as well. I don't know. Other people probably create more crises than I do, but I think I do it from time to time.
Yeah.
So probably those two for me. What
yeah, I've never seen them before, but Paul had. I'd say mentoring master definitely from Paul. My top one probably would be passion igniter, apostolic and teaching, but maybe with a bit of the prophetic in there as well. Mm-hmm. But I'd say my main one would be, I like to mobilize people.
Great.
So I'd say passion igniter.
Passion igniter. And can I just ask you, so given that's the one you've gone to, the passion igniter, you know, what are the upsides of that style for you, and what can sometimes be the downsides?
Well, I think I can be quite challenging, which I think the downside is I'm not actually very pastoral. I mean, I love people, but I love giving them a bit of a spurring them on to love and good deeds, that kind of thing.
So the real apostolic then.
So I think I can be quite challenging sometimes, and although I do really love people, I genuinely love people, but I'm not really pastoral. So I mean, everyone has a bit of the pastoral. Yeah, you have to love people, don't you, be in this business? Yeah. But I think that would be the downside, that sometimes it's too big a step, sometimes it's too big a challenge, sometimes I can be a bit abrasive, right, a little bit harsh, maybe can offend people. I think, I mean, the prophetic can sometimes offend people as well, can't it? Yeah.
And conversely, the kind of, if you've got too much of the shepherding pastoral alongside it, you may tend to be kind of risk averse and not give people quite as much a kick as they need from sometimes. So I think you know, that's why we need a mixture of all these things, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't do it as much as I used to, but at one time I used to throw out deliberately provocative statements and wonder if anybody would respond, because one of the things that I detest is passivity, or whatever. Passivity, yeah. Passivity. I want people to be dynamic, interactive learners. So, you know, sometimes I would deliberately throw out a controversial statement and to see if anybody would react. And I have been known to say, is anybody going to challenge me on that? You know, so I kind of invite that. And when I teach outside of the church, I always invite people to disagree with me and challenge me, because I think we learn better if we challenge stuff than if we are just passive and all agree with each other. So I think respectful disagreement is healthy, and I think it's part of the exploration process.
Yeah, I do think that's a big part of the way we learn, isn't it? Is by disagreeing and understanding why we disagree, and finding the common ground and the differences, and grappling with those difficulties. Is a lot of what teaching actually comes down to, I think.
And you did mention that in your talk on Sunday about that, the ability to ask the awkward questions sometimes, which you saw in yourself. And it brings about that debate, and therefore it can bring about much more learning rather than just that passivity.
I can give you an example. Actually, many years ago, I talked about baptism in the Holy Spirit on a Sunday, and I can't remember that was the only topic. Anyway, it was a big part of it. And I thought very hard. I don't often write phrases down when I preach. I tend to be very much bullet points, but I actually wrote down something word for word because I wanted to get it right. And I talked about the fact that I believe that speaking in tongues was the main evidence of baptism in the Spirit. And I was quite careful how I worded it. But somebody from the congregation was quite offended by that. And their husband actually started an email exchange with me, which was actually really helpful. So we then had a bit of a discussion over the email about why I thought that and why I'd said that, and I think that was really helpful to their learning.
Yeah, and I guess as people who are gifted in teaching, that challenge is also helpful in helping you as the teacher really think clearly about what it is you're saying and why you're saying it, and being able to back that up, given the importance of what it is that we're often sharing.
Yeah.
Good. What about others? What are they thinking? What are they saying? Nobody wants to talk to us. Go for it, Gemma. Go.
I'll talk to you. So when I first looked at these, I kind of thought, I'll be the shepherding and teaching one. But then when you went through them, I thought, actually, no, I'm not. I'm teaching and shepherding. And I think that's a really interesting, the way that the difference between the two. Just because I think, so I don't think of teaching as in, like standing at the front and teaching. I think I see it more as kind of team leading and that kind of teaching bit. So I can see through this process, I can see that actually that's the bit that's more me, more so than the shepherding. But before we talked about this, I wouldn't have said it was that way round. Right. So for me, that's been really interesting. I still am the shepherding bit, but for me, it's more the teaching. And when we did the the quiz thing, the survey, the questionnaire thing, it came out as teacher and then shepherding. And I can remember at the time thinking, I think they're around the wrong way. But that just shows actually that was my misunderstanding of really what those two things are.
So that's really helpful.
Sorry,
I was thinking that was really interesting, and that sounds like it's been really helpful. And the master is more about somebody who comes alongside and disciples people like Jesus did, I guess. Yeah. So I found that really interesting. That just those two, and the way that they're the other way around, and how that my view on that really.
Good. Anybody else?
Stephen, can you remind me what Memory Maker is?
So the Memory Maker is the prophetic and the teaching. So let me click my notes. The Memory Maker, they have the mission to remind you of who you are. They focus on helping us shape our Christian identity. They know the Father. They can remind us we're His children. The Memory Maker helps us build a whole sort of list of moments when we rediscover who we truly, whose image we truly bear. They get under our skin. They invite us to follow, and they show us what we're made of, and better yet, who we're made for. So very much pointing us to God, constantly pointing us to God.
Oh yeah, okay, that would work. Prophet, yeah, okay. I'm doing it by a process of elimination rather than one jumping out.
Yeah.
You haven't tried the survey yet, Richard.
No, I did do the survey, yeah, but I'm just I'm not. It's not the shepherd style. I tend not to be strong in that area. I think it really leaves me with the either Passion Igniter or the Memory Maker, and I'm not really sure about either, to be honest.
Did you just read the Truth Excavator one? Sorry, I did find it ironic you asked for a recap on the Memory Maker one. I thought that was a great one to not remember.
So what you say? Do you not see yourself in the Truth Excavator, Richard?
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's the one.
I couldn't remember what that one was.
So that's, yeah, that really is that evangelistic and teaching. You know, so the truth excavator, you know, it's about basically getting out of the classroom, getting your hands dirty, getting into the field. So if you think of Indiana Jones and how, and I used him as the example, as a kind of the example, you know, it's not so much about the classroom, it's all about the getting out there, digging into situations, digging into, you know, history, whatever it might be.
I think we could do a good takeoff of Indiana Jones. I think that could be one of our next family.
I think that with the you've got your next topic. I look forward to that.
For what it's worth, I don't know you at all, Richard, and the only time I've ever seen you in action was on that Ignite joint service, and from that I would have put you squarely in the Truth Excavator.
Right.
And having never met you, but just from that. But I've still not forgotten the popcorn though, so you did make some memories.
Yeah, I see. And what about you, Helen? You know, because you obviously you're quite a combination, but probably very different.
Well, I like getting people very much experiential, but I think that is quite strong with the prophetic one. My real passion is for people to really understand who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so when I work with Richard, I would say, yeah, I probably am a bit more full on with the hearts, is that fair, Richard? Heart stuff. Whereas Richard's really good at the context and the how it builds and that kind of thing.
That's if I can get a word in edgeways, yeah.
Just for Paul and Ruth, you do realise they're brother and sister. We just thought we'd...
Yeah. We got that from the Ignite thing.
We're just waiting for our dad to wade in now.
That's probably right, Helen. Yes, I agree with that, yeah.
So what about some others? Jane, you're strong on the teaching side. I mean, obviously you were a teacher in your profession once upon a time. What about you? Where do you see yourself?
Well, I trained professionally, of course, as a teacher of languages. I'm used to working with classrooms of kids, teenagers, but I would describe myself as a mentoring master. That's the category I think I fall into best. I very much enjoy working one-to-one with people now, rather than with groups or with classes, as you'd say. And yeah, that seems to be where I seem to be strong. I am most definitely not a crisis creator. That is something I would never do to anyone, because I've had it done to me. And I know what it feels like to be the recipient of someone who works like that. It's horrible. So I definitely would not do that to anyone. You know, I think I'm much more of a mentoring master, teaching, shepherding, one-to-one, encouraging, helping people on the path, bit by bit. You know, I do that, and some of what I do comes out of my training, but a great deal more of it comes out of what I hope the Holy Spirit is telling me, you know, and how He is guiding me, because professional teacher training is so different from how you do it in the kingdom of God. It's a completely different thing. For a start, the motivation is different. You know, and the end goal, if you like, you know, in professional teaching, you have your scheme of work, you have your aims and objectives, you have your lesson plans, you have all that. With the kingdom of God, it's not quite like that, because you're dealing with a person, but you're not training someone for an exam. You are helping someone to get to know Jesus better and become more like Him. And that's a totally different way of approaching teaching. And therefore, I don't think you can do it without shepherding. For me, I couldn't do it without shepherding. In terms of the prophetic, I do operate in the prophetic from time to time. When I do, it's more along the lines of words of encouragement, which fits in with the teaching and shepherding side of things. I'm not someone really who would say I have the mind of God, you know, about this, that, and the other. It's more a sense that God is saying this to you for your encouragement. So that's how I tend to work. So memory making, yeah, maybe a little bit, but that's the way I work there. Never a passion igniter, I don't think. And I'm not a truth excavator. maybe if I think someone's got the wrong end of the stick about something, you know, then I'm inclined to say, look, that's not quite how the Bible puts it. Let's look at the truth of the way the Bible puts it. So that's how I see these 5 things from my personal experience, anyway. You know, that's how it seems to work for me.
No, thanks. That's really interesting.
At the risk of causing a bit of controversy, can I disagree with some of your analysis of the
Absolutely, you can disagree.
School teaching and teaching in church? Because I think there are big differences, but I also think there are a lot of things in common, and actually both are focused on bettering the individual, and you can't actually be a good classroom teacher without focusing on the individuals. And so, you know, we need to in that context tailor what we're doing, be creative and build stuff that's going to work for the people in front of you. So you know, I don't see them as kind of that diametrically opposite.
No, I didn't mean to imply that. That's not quite what I meant to imply.
Look for the parallels, and actually I think there are quite a lot of things that we can learn from one to apply into the other, and both ways round.
Yeah, I still work occasionally as a private tutor, so I still have that, you know, that kind of thing that is not a classroom related thing. But it has been at least 20 years since I was in the classroom, so you can understand where I'm coming from there.
Yeah, sure. And every classroom is different anyway, so yeah.
Can I also make the point that you mentioned exams? So I think if you're training or teaching people to pass an exam, then that has fewer parallels with what we do in the church than if you're
it does. As I say, that is completely different.
Promote understanding and depth of understanding of a subject. So, for example, with Paul, if he's teaching people mathematical concepts and not towards an exam, that's promoting understanding, and that's very similar to what we're trying to do with teaching people to walk with Jesus and to be good disciples.
Yeah, I agree.
Whereas we're not teaching people to pass an exam at all.
No.
So, in that sense, what you say is correct, that it doesn't match with that. Depends how you understand classroom teaching and what your motivation is.
And the context in which you're doing that teaching. And again, one-to-one tutoring is obviously very different from teaching in a big class, even in a subject like maths, which is what I teach. You know, obviously you can be much more personal about it in a small setting.
I've had a very interesting experience teaching adults in a Christian context, teaching French. There was something called Creative Academy at Lincoln when we were at the Lincoln Church there, and they used to offer courses in different subjects to people free of charge, people who couldn't afford to attend evening classes, that sort of thing. And I taught French, and that was very interesting because I was teaching both my academic subjects without an exam in view, but I was also teaching from the point of view of a Christian, demonstrating, you know, the Christian values and how you operate as a Christian teacher, which was very different from anything else I've ever done. I wasn't mentoring in that particular context. It was totally unusual, and yet it taught me a great deal about what it means to be a true teacher. Someone who is not just teaching an academic subject to someone for whatever purpose, but someone who is also modeling Jesus, the teacher, and the way that he communicated. It was so much more about communication and about helping people to grow and helping people to be more than they thought they could be, and encouragement and all that kind of thing fed into it. It was a remarkable experience. I did it for about 1.5 years, and I've always been grateful for that experience. Again, it matches the mentoring master thing, I think, more than anything else. But it was very valuable.
That's very interesting.
Thank you,
Jim. One of the parallels between maybe a teacher and in the classroom and a teacher in the church is the ability to connect and get the attention of those that you were talking to.
Yeah.
And I remember reading the book 7 Laws of the Learner, and he was talking about, he'd been taught by Howard Hendricks in the States, and he says he deliberately looked out the window for the first 5 minutes because he wanted to time how long it would take Howard Hendricks to zoom in on him. Now, and it was fascinating. He said he used all the techniques of getting attention that he could, but he kept, and he really wanted it. And he was a very, I don't know much about the man, but I've heard he was a very dynamic teacher. And he wanted to time how long it took Howard Hendricks to just completely zoom in on him. And he really wanted to listen, and he had his attention completely, but he just kept looking out the window because he wanted to see what he'd do next. And he just talked about how a good teacher always commands the attention of those that he's talking to. Because if you haven't got the attention of those you're talking to, they're not learning. And it's a really good example of that. And he said it was like within 4 minutes, Howard Hendricks had used like 3 stories, had used visual illustrations, and then just stood in front of him and just said, "What's wrong? Why are you not looking this way?" And because he noticed, and I think so often in churches, I see people, and I'm aware of this myself, when you start losing the room, but you keep the same way, and you realise that no one's learning, and you're no longer teaching because you lost the attention of the room. And I think that's a really powerful similarity between the two. And all the best teachers I had were the ones who commanded the attention in the classroom and kept us engaged using different techniques. So
yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, Rich, because I totally agree. The challenge you've sometimes got, and I'm thinking back to some times when I was probably less teaching, more presenting to a very big audience. Not that I've done it very often, but I've done it a few times. And that's what I found really hard, because it's really difficult to understand, am I engaging? Because there's so many of them. Most of them you can't see beyond the second or third row. And so actually it's just having, the belief in what I'm saying is getting through there. Whereas I find it much easier when you're right, you can almost see the whites of their eyes, and you can really see, am I making a connection here? So I can, that's been my experience as well. It's really hard sometimes to keep yourself as a teacher motivated to carry on when you can't really gauge, are they understanding this? Do they get it? Have I got their attention?
Yeah, that's right.
Great. So anybody else? Trevor, you're sitting quietly in the corner there. Anything you'd like to contribute?
Well, I would sort of come at it like Gemma did, actually, to be perfectly honest. I think I would probably be either the top one, shepherding and teaching. Do find the name crisis creator a little strange. Resolving crisis, but not creating it. Or the teaching and shepherding. And I don't know, I think probably about the same level of need, teaching and shepherding. But then that comes to, if I think back to when I was at work, and again, like Gemma said, made the point about teams. I mean, in a sense, if you're leading a team, you've got a kind of mini apostolic role to that team, probably, you have to set a vision and inspire them and so on and so forth. So I think maybe which of these you come up as depends a little bit on where you're functioning at the time.
Yeah.
But it was also interesting that Jane said something like, I couldn't possibly stand being with a crisis creator or something. So it's interesting that I think I might be
warned, Trevor. Be
Stephen,
somewhere.
Paul was a crisis creator, the apostle, because he actually used to start churches and move on very quickly, leaving people, fairly new Christians, in charge, didn't he? But then all his letters are about that support. Is that a crisis creator?
I hadn't thought about. I always thought of Paul as the apostolic in teaching. So, but you're right. I mean, but I suppose the crisis creator, when I look back at my notes, it's very much about, sort of caring for, giving them enough to let them get on with it, and to learn from, they sort of learn from the mistakes and they learn very quickly. So actually, I think as you've thought about it, Helen, that could equally be the Apostle Paul. He gave them enough, he loved them, and he kept in touch with them to keep them on track, but he sort of let them go on with it almost, didn't he?
Yeah, because I remember just looking at it and being surprised how quickly he would start a church with new Christians and kind of move on.
Yeah.
And kind of throw people into these roles.
Yeah.
But then he did keep with that letter writing and shepherding.
I think that's a great observation. I hadn't thought about that. So you go, Paul the crisis creator. There's a sermon right there. Great. So anybody else? willing to share? Naomi, you've been quiet. It's not like you usually share with us in these sessions.
Would I be wrong if I would think that because we have a certain percentage of shepherding, teaching, apostolic, and so on, then in different points of our lives, we could be just passion igniters and then later on mentoring and so on?
I think you're absolutely right, Naomi. Yeah, as we grow, as we evolve, and sometimes I think as someone said, depending on the context, we may have to fulfill some of these other roles, and that is the beauty of all of these. We're no one thing, and it's that combination, that continually evolving combination, as we're learning and growing, and as we're being used. I think, as Jane rightly said, being led by the Holy Spirit, being used, he can equip us in these. I mean, there'll be some that we naturally gravitate to, and are the ones that we feel most comfortable with. But all of them, you're absolutely right. We need to be open to be cultivated in. If you see what I mean. Well done.
Thank you.
Okay, so I promised Ruth, sorry, Paul and Ruth, that they would get some questions. So give them a Q&A session. You know, as the experienced teachers, we've never heard what they've explained to us where they sit in this. So are there any questions for Paul and Ruth? Well, I'll start the ball rolling then. Paul, Ruth, I mean, we've known each other a number of years, and not very closely, but I've seen you operate, and it strikes me you're two very obviously very different people, and you've, I think, illustrated that tonight in terms of the combinations that you've identified yourselves as. Within a marriage, and obviously you serve together in the leadership of the church down in Royston, thank you. Sorry, I put it around my head there. You served together. How did you find that work then, as a combination, being so very different in your approach to this sort of teaching element?
Do you want to start, or shall I?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think we're complementary, and I think if we've been too similar, that's not good. I mean, I think in any team, I mean, people have talked about teams at work and so forth, but in any team, and certainly in a leadership team in a church, you want a variety, don't you, of giftings. And you need obviously to respect and honour each other, and the fact that you're different. I mean, I can remember sitting in leadership meetings thinking, when I have these great ideas, why is it that Tony and Paul always say, what about the finance, what about this, what about that, and kill my joy? But, you know, and I always joke that, you know, I'd have, for every 200 ideas I have, only one gets past Paul. But, you know, I think I've come over the years to really recognise the value of that you can have people who are passionate, have ideas, but not all of those are very wise to do, or the right time, or whatever, or exactly what God's saying. You can sometimes, you know, I remember Caroline used to say that Peter kept her feet firmly on the ground, and I think maybe Paul does that for me. So I think complementary giftings is a really powerful combination. Yeah. So I personally think it's very well, and we've done different types of teaching in the church, haven't you? You've come alongside people more, you've done more kids' work. And I
remember many times when we've been talking about what kind of teaching to bring on a Sunday morning, you know, just to use that as one slice of what teaching is about. But when discussing that, we've had a lot of conversations about, well, this particular message would come much better from Ruth because you know, people need to kind of be given a prod and provoked a little bit more, whereas this other thing, maybe it's better if I bring it because it needs a different approach. So you know, we've kind of learnt to work with our different strengths and kind of put them together, hopefully to mostly good advantage. But you know, and that's worked for us as a married couple leading the church together. But in any team environment, you know, you need that mix and that balance, I think, to make a healthy team.
It's really interesting the point you just made there about deciding who would the message come better from. So there's a real humility there then, because I know that, you know, sometimes as the teacher it's like, well, you know, that's my gifting, I want to be there doing it, but having the humility and the understanding to think, actually, this is better coming from you than from me, I think is really interesting.
And we had that wider when at one time when I was leading the preaching team some years ago, we had a wide variety of styles on that team. And we used to definitely well, we used to discuss who would be best to do different things, and generally people want to do the stuff they're better at, actually, because we all love working within our strengths, because, you know, it's better for everyone, really. It's a win-win, isn't it? So, you know, we had some people that were better at teaching all age, some people that were, yeah, as Paul says, sometimes when they need a bit of a challenge, somebody's better. Somebody who needs something more of an encouraging word, word of exhortation, that might be someone else. And the whole different style of an approach. And I think that's powerful. I think if we're all too alike, you know, then it doesn't reach everyone, because different people learn from different things, different styles and different ways.
Anybody else?
Could I ask a question?
Of course, yes.
If we say that teaching really in the church, my mind falls into two categories. One is the teaching from the front, the preaching and the teaching. But if we leave that now, because that's not so much done by everyone, and you can have specific sessions on that.
Absolutely.
To me, the value of looking at this is actually to recognise that we are all teachers in one way or another, and the value of just living lives together, coming up alongside someone, maybe giving them some advice now and then, etc., etc. We all learn from each other, and if we all learn from each other, then actually we're all teachers, even if it's only
absolutely.
So therefore, the question would be, the opening question is, out of the discussion that we've had and what came up in the interview, what do you think we should take to encourage people, to encourage all of us more on that end of the teaching scale, rather than the how to preach better? You know, what can we take out of this? What should we focus on? What would we encourage people to focus on in terms of that wider sense of what teaching is?
Yeah, I absolutely agree that it's something that we're all involved with, and I guess how do we promote that? First of all, we've got to encourage people that it's okay to see yourself as, I'm doing a bit of teaching, even when all I'm doing is meeting with somebody for a cup of coffee, or a Zoom meeting maybe. So that it's okay to consider that as teaching, and think, you know, I don't have an agenda or a scheme of work or a lesson plan or anything like that for my one-to-one over a cup of coffee, but nonetheless I can get hold of some good principles of how to teach, in the sense of passing on something that I've learned from the Lord. How can I best pass that on to someone else and better their experience and their walk with God? You know, for a lot of people, we just need to start with encouraging them that it's okay to look at things like that. But I think a lot of the principles that we've talked about apply equally well at that level. So, you know, one of the principles that I drew out of this classroom teaching thing was about building relationships of mutual respect and empathy and trust and warmth with your students, which works in a classroom. Obviously it works if you're standing up at the front of a church preaching, but you know, it's perhaps even more important when we're in a kind of mentoring one-to-one or a cell group setting, something like that, that we need to have that basis of trust amongst us, so that we can say occasionally hard things, so that people will listen to our heart and not just judge us on the fact that I chose the wrong word when I said it, but they'll work with me. So you know, I think there's a lot of those kind of lessons that we can take out of it, and you know, this whole thing of questioning that we've talked about a few times, you know, that's something that we can all consciously try and use. So rather than sitting there telling somebody how they should do it, how can we get them to see it for themselves by asking probing questions and that kind of thing? So there's a lot of these principles that actually I think work on all these different levels in slightly different ways, but the principles run throughout.
Yeah, I think that's really good. Can I just add on to that? I think the key thing is about passing on. And I think I can't remember the scripture now, but I think does Paul talk about pass on what you've already learned, what you've learned? Oh no, it was about Timothy, wasn't he? He'd learnt it from his mother and his grandmother. You know, it's about passing on what we've learned. And however we do that, and we'll all do it in different ways. And I remember years ago, Simon saying, who are you training up to do what you do? And I think we all used to, at whatever level we're operating in the church, we should be looking for who's the person that I'm bringing up behind me. So if I'm working with children, who am I encouraging in, who I recognise that might have a gifting to work with children that I'm bringing on? If I'm doing the administration, who am I bringing alongside me to learn about doing administration? I mean, that's in roles, but also in general discipleship of becoming more like Jesus. What am I passing on to people? What have I learnt about Jesus that I'm passing on? And I think that happens through life, and it's as much about example. I mean, in the parenting world, the classic thing is not do as I do, not as I say. We'd love it to be do as I say, but it's actually do as I do. And we have to be models, don't we? We have to be role models, and seek to pass on. And it seems to me this passing on is really, really important, because there's a whole thing in scripture about passing down the generations. And it's great to see some of you that there's several generations of the same family here, which is brilliant, because we need to be passing it on down the generations. And I think it's so important, and I think we're not always effective at doing that. So who are you teaching what you already know? That's my challenge to you.
I think we joked about this on Sunday, didn't we, Stephen, about the ultimate goal is make yourself redundant.
That's right, it's just what's going through my head.
So your students can become teachers of others.
Yeah. Richard, were you want? Sorry, I thought Richard was I think wanted to get in. I'll come back to you, Gemma, just one moment.
That's fine.
I was going to think about mine's more a teaching from the front question. So I mean, a lot of good teachers say they got better by intentionally getting better, by thinking about the techniques that they were using, how they use story, how they use experience, how they use repetition, how they use structure. So my question is, how have you or got any good advice about how you improve deliberately at teaching through the techniques that we use?
I think for me, the first thing would be ask for feedback. We are terrible in the British culture at giving constructive feedback. I'm sorry, you can disagree if you like, but it's a generalization. We're very poor. Most of the time, most of us, I would dare to say, probably in work life as well, operate in a vacuum, and that's not good. And we need to learn to constructively criticize. So we started a thing in the preaching team when Matt was in charge of it, actually, where we all undertook as preaching team people to give people 3 things that were really good about how they're teaching, and 1 thing they can improve. And to make it really, because that was a nice teaching is no good. It's got to be specific. It's got to mean something. So, so specific and constructive. So I think be bold, be courageous, ask people to give you feedback. Sometimes that's a bit scary, but you will grow more if you ask for feedback. And the second thing that I would say is I always thought I wasn't a very reflective person until I realised that I dive in and then I reflect afterwards. Sometimes when it's all gone wrong, but we need to complete that reflective cycle, because that's how we learn. For any of you who are teachers, you'll know about the Krebs cycle. Not the Krebs cycle. I've got that wrong, I think. That's something different. What's the cycle? Maybe Jane can help me. But anyway, the teaching cycle where you observe and then you learn and you reflect. But so basically reflecting back on what was good about that and what could I have improved. And I've actually realised when I started doing my PGC, everyone kept telling me how reflective I was. I never thought of myself as reflective. So I think those 2 things: ask for feedback, be courageous, and don't always ask for, obviously they need to be people who love you and you have got your best in mind. You don't want to ask your worst enemy, but ask people who will be prepared to be honest and say the tough stuff. Take a step of courage, and then also reflect for yourself. I do quite a bit of journaling, I think helps me as well, but how you reflect is up to you. But reflect back and think about what was good, what could I improve. I never deliver the same thing twice, ever, because it's always slightly different, because I've always thought about what could be better. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I'd say don't get too hung up on structure. I don't believe there is a good structure for a sermon. I think, you know, every sermon is different, and we need to be flexible to adapt and do stuff differently. But obviously there are principles, and you know, telling stories is often a good way of grounding what we're saying, and make sure that we're not just in some theoretical plane up here, but actually it's relevant to people. And you know, so consciously doing some of that stuff, I think, is more important than kind of thinking, oh, I've got to have 3 points and a PowerPoint slide, because I think we need to get away from anything rigid like that.
Well, one other thing where Paul's really helped me. So years ago, I loved the scriptures, and I used to spend hours digging into it, and I'd go down all these little blind alleys and wild goose chases, and I'd have so much material, and you can only deliver 20-30 minutes, and Paul would say, what's the main point? What do you want them to learn, and what do you want them to go away with? And I was like, and I always think of that now. I was like, what is the main thing that I want them to go away with? And try and stick with that. And you only actually need one main thing. If people remember that, that would be good.
Gemma, you wanted to ask a question, did you?
Oh no, it was really just an observation that followed on from something Ruth was saying earlier about when you were talking, Ruth, about your marriage, and then I was thinking about our marriage, and John and I are very different. John is I don't do strategy, vision, goals, anything like that. That's really what John does. And I guess when I was thinking about that, in trying to encourage everyone in the teaching element of themselves, sometimes I think it's about maybe encouraging them to explain how they've done certain things. So if you're looking at like vision and strategy, for someone like John, it's really easy to kind of say, well, this is where we're going and this is what we need to do. For someone like me, I wouldn't know where to start. So I guess encouraging people to explain the process to get everyone's understanding, that was kind of what I was, that's what I was just making a point, really.
A really good point.
An observation.
That's helpful.
Very good.
Well, look, guys, the time has run away with us. This has been great. Thank you, Paul and Ruth, for your input. Thank you, all of you, for your comments, your observations, and your questions. I think we could go on for another couple of hours on this one easily, but sadly we can't. So, as I say, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and hopefully you've all enjoyed that as much as I have.
I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for inviting us.
Very good. Thank you, Stephen, for pulling it all together.
You're most welcome.